Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst. Today I wanted to talk about the purpose of your podcast or the purpose of a podcast. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, this is one of the first things I tell my clients to think about when they come to me. They're like, Hayleigh, I want to start a podcast. I want to make this happen. I'm like, okay, great. What is the purpose of it? Because if you don't know the purpose of your podcast, it is going to be a little hard to be on brand and reach the goals that you want to reach and really understand what impact you want to have on the world through your podcast. So I package this up into 3 questions to ask yourself when you're thinking of starting a podcast, or if you're thinking about growing your podcast, right? This can work on that side of things too. It doesn't have to just be for new podcasts. Maybe you've reached a hitting point where you're like, ugh, I don't love my podcast anymore. Or you're like, ugh, I'm not seeing the results that I want to see from my show. What am I doing wrong? I offer podcast audits. And so this is where I look at your marketing, your branding, your content that you're creating from your podcast and what you're using to market it. And most oftenly, I find that people are not marketing it in a way that actually makes sense, or they're not marketing it at all, or their podcast topic is so all over the place, it's not drawing in the listeners that you may want. Because when you know who you're talking to, and when you know who is on the other side of the world listening to your podcast, then you could speak to that person. If you are talking about a topic about business and then a topic about gardening and then like a personal, you went on vacation podcast and then you want to talk about like your weekends. If you're not like an influencer, that's not going to make sense. If you're a business coach or someone in business, or maybe you sell a product and your topics are all over the place and not really relating to what you want your audience to feel and think about and really take action on, it's going to be very confusing for them. And it's also going to be very confusing for you when it comes time to marketing and when it comes time to promoting it. When it comes time to recording the next episode. Here's my rule of thumb. And we're going to get into these tips deeply, but my rule of thumb is we've all heard of the phrase elevator pitch, where, you know, maybe you want a raise from your boss, or maybe you want to do this or that. Okay, think of an elevator pitch in like 30 seconds. That's what this is, like quick. You're taking an elevator with someone and maybe they look at you and say, hey, what is your podcast about? Okay, you only have 4 or 5 floors to tell them what that is about. So you have to do it quick. You have to say, my podcast, for instance, the Employee to Boss podcast, is where I interview entrepreneurs about their journey from employee to boss. And I also share a lot of tips on business and podcasting and just really actionable steps that people can take to move forward in their business or with their podcast or with their marketing. So that is my elevator pitch. What is yours, right? You can pause this right here and kind of like think about it. But if you don't have one, or you're like, oh, I talk about, you know, various different topics about my life, get deeper. Get so much deeper than that, because that's where you're going to lose people. That's where people are going to be like, what? Sure. Like, you seem like a cool person, but why am I listening to your life, right? Now, you absolutely can talk about your life, but maybe you can say, I share stories about overcoming this, and this in my life and how I'm living like my best life now. And then make sure that all of your episodes connect to that overarching theme. I think that most podcasts do have a theme, and I do think that most people think about this, but it's very easy to like stray away from what results you're actually putting out there and what content you're actually putting out there. So this feeds into my 3 questions to ask yourself really well. So let's get right into this. The first question that I want you to ask yourself about your podcast is decide on the impact that you want to have on others. So what I mean by this is, are you making them laugh? Is that like the goal? Are you educating them? Are you making them more informed on a certain topic? What do you want them to feel and take away with? Another thing to think about is like, yes, you may have your elevator pitch down, but what are your listeners saying to someone who may ask about like their favorite podcast? Okay. If someone was to say, oh, my favorite podcast is the Employee to Boss podcast, and their friend was like, oh, that's cool. Like, what is it about? Would they have the same answer as you? That's a big one. Because every single episode, people will have like an idea of who you are and what your podcast represents. And so if they can't tell their friends what the podcast is about, there's probably some misunderstanding of like what you're putting out there versus what you think you're putting out there. Think about like a movie. If someone is like, oh, what was that movie about? And you're like, honestly, it was about so many different things. Like, I could not tell you. You just need to watch it for yourself. Some people might go watch it, and some people might be like, weird. How can they not know? They just watched it. So think about that when you're thinking about the impact that you have on other people through your podcast. The second question I want you to ask is, what impact do you want to have on yourself through your podcast? Is it to grow your business? Is it to make connections? Is it to make money? What is it? Is it to use as a key part in your marketing? Really set your long-term and short-term goals. So when I start working with a podcast client, and maybe I'm helping them launch their podcast, or maybe I'm helping them with their marketing, I need to know these things. I need to know what your goals are for the next month, the next 3 months, 6 months, and then year and beyond. Because every action that you're going to take today impacts tomorrow's actions and the next day's actions and the actions after that. So it is so important to know where you want to go with your podcast and what impact you want it to have on yourself and your business, because that will make it so it's easier to reach that. So do some soul searching, do some thinking, really think about like, what do I want to achieve by starting this? Because podcasts can take a lot of time to grow and start and upkeep. And so make sure you are dedicated to it, and that will make it a lot easier to keep consistent with it. So those are 2 questions that you really should dive into. And the last question that I have that you should think about and ask yourself is thinking about it in this context, okay? Before podcasts, there was YouTube and like a ton of video content. And then audio blew up and people were like starting podcasts all the time, and things adapt, right? So are you willing to adapt with your podcast? Now, I think personally, and this might be a hot take, if you're not recording a video podcast and you're not publishing a video podcast, you are missing out on so many opportunities to grow your podcast and your business and really gain that new reach. This is another hot take. The question here is, how are you going to maximize your reach? And are you willing to put in time and effort with the marketing? Maybe you need to hire someone for this. Maybe you need to set apart time to maybe take like a marketing course, or maybe you need to book a hour-long call with me and we can kind of do some consulting on what would work for you and figure out like what your marketing even looks like. Because if you're not willing to do this, then it will be very, very hard to grow your podcast. People are not typically going to find your podcast on podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple. Now, maybe they will sometimes, but if they're looking for a money mindset podcast, 1 million are going to be pulled up. If they're looking for a business podcast, probably literally 1 million are going to be pulled up. So it's up to you to stand out and reach the audience and bring them in. So another hot take that I have on this are some of the best podcasts are successful because they share clips and people don't always have to listen to the entire episode. Okay, this sounds crazy, but hear me out on this. If you're on TikTok, you see this all the time. People share clips of their podcasts that make people just be like, oh wow, like, what is this? I love this. This is so funny. Or, wow, I learned something. And then they can go and listen to the whole episode if they have time. If they don't, the best marketing out there right now is being through people who are posting maybe like 10, 15 short clips from their hour-long podcast episode that people are like, this is hilarious. This is so good. Or this is so informative. And then they can share it with their friends. And it's easier for people to listen to a 30-second soundbite than it is to listen to an hour-long episode. It's also easier for them to listen to it and be like, oh my gosh, my friend will love this. They could share that clip on social media. You know, if it's on Instagram, it's just a quick share. TikTok, it's the same. Their friend can listen to it and be like, huh. And then, you never know, they might listen to the whole episode. And I think that normally they will. But the best podcasts give people the opportunity to learn those quick things without having to dive into a whole episode. So think about that when you're creating your clips and audio clips and how you're approaching your marketing. I think that these are 3 questions that if you really dive into, it can be kind of overwhelming, but you want to figure out these things before you get too far ahead of yourself, because you need to like set expectations of how you're going to show up online, how you're building your credibility, what this all looks like for you. So just think about that and really get these answered before you make it too far into the podcast process. And I promise you, once you figure this out, it'll be easier. Now, I am super excited to talk about a new offer that I have that I'm building out right now. So I'm starting a wait list for this. But it is for anyone who wants to literally blow up your podcast in just the way that I was talking about. So if you want to grow your podcast, but you're not sure about the marketing part, or you're not sure about this or that, that's what this program is for. So not only will I help you with the production side of things, I'll help you with the marketing side. So currently with all of my offers, I do create, you know, if my client has a video podcast, I will edit the video for them, post it on YouTube, and create like a video clip. But this is taking it to the next level. This is taking it to the level of, I will post things for you. I will blow up your podcast. I will get new eyes on your podcast, new ears through social media. So whatever platform you feel most comfortable with, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, Facebook, I will help you with that. And I will create the content that will help you grow your podcast and get way more eyes and ears on it. And it will not be any more difficult for you. All of my offers before really left marketing in the hands of my clients, and I do think that, you know, my clients do a great job at that, and I do coach them a little bit through that, but this new offer is going to be so much more hands-on for me that you won't really have to do much other than press record and send me the audio. I will handle production, editing, all of these things, as well as marketing and really getting the right audience to you. Because I think the reason I thought of this is so many of my clients and so many people who want to start a podcast are overwhelmed with the marketing. They don't know what to post, when to post, how to post, all of these things that like really stress them out. And they're all things that I know and that I have done for my podcast and for my clients. And this is in my wheelhouse. This is my expertise. I wanted to create an offer that will help people who are overwhelmed be successful without being stressed. So if you're interested in this, send me an email or find me on Instagram. My email is hello@espressopodcastproduction. You can visit my Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, or my website, and you can contact me through there. Just send me a message that you're interested and want to get on the wait list. And once my sales page is on my website and everything is like there and beautiful, then I will start taking on a couple clients for this. Spaces will be limited, not trying to create like a scarcity mindset in anyone who's interested in this. Spaces are just limited because I will be creating everything for you and posting it and making your podcast as amazing and big as it can be. And so it takes a lot of my dedicated time. And so that is why I am only taking on a few clients for this. So, like I said, if you're on the wait list, you will be the first to know. So just let me know if you're interested in that. And I hope that these questions that you should ask yourself about your podcast really do help you find the purpose of your podcast and solidify that. If you have any questions or just want to come and connect with me, Instagram is the best place to come and find me. I share so many tips on there about podcasting, about business, about my podcast. So there's a lot of stuff to learn on my Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Employee to Boss podcast, and I will talk to you all soon. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.